going to discuss some more advanced CSS techniques today. It's pretty easy to learn how to use class and ID and tag styles. We covered this a few weeks ago. But technically, these aren't really styles at all. If you think about it, these are selectors. These are the instructions that tell a browser what a page element, be it text, be it an image or otherwise, it tells a browser what page element to look for so it can apply formatting to those objects. So, for example, a tag selector like your p tag, like your image tag, like your body tag, etc., tells a browser to apply formatting of any instance of that item. So all of my p tags will have specific font, family, a certain indent, whether or not that text transforms. I guess I don't need that, but it controls every time that pops up. And same thing with class styles, except it only applies when the class name is attached to it. But class, ID, and tag selectors are just the tip of the iceberg, because CSS offers many other types of selectors, and these can let you format even the smallest page element. In the past, Dreamweaver lumped these selectors under the term compound selectors, and they used this term to describe advanced selectors like a pseudo class, which we will describe soon. Pseudo classes kind of count for like these guys, like where the a colon, this is affecting all of your lengths, but it affects them in a slightly more detailed way. The book is going to refer to these as descendant selectors. So think of a family tree. You've got your, you might be a descendant of your grandparents. So think of it kind of in that way. Now, we've already been using compound selectors here a little bit in the instance right here where we think of our navigation, and we were trying to control how our navigation elements react to make sure that our nav bar, for instance, lays out horizontally as opposed to being a vertical list. And when we did this, we had selected on an item. So I might select one list item, and when I clicked the selector panel, it automatically attempts to be as specific as possible. And you notice as I hover over that, use the up or down key to be more or less specific. So I clicked on beef, which is a list item inside of an unordered list, which is inside of a separate list, which is in the navigation ID. So it is trying to be as specific as possible to compound how deeply I want to go into specification or specificity. Now, I'm not going to actually use that, but I wanted to use that as a visual example so you could see how that reacts. To delete, I'll just come up here, click the little minus icon. Now, with going back to the idea of descendant selectors, tag styles, as we've talked about before, have their drawbacks. So as an example, the p tag makes simple work of formatting every paragraph, but it's also indiscriminate. So if I want a specific paragraph to look different from the others, using the p tag isn't a great idea because it is going to affect every selector that matches. And since the p tag is used everywhere, that's going to cause some problems. So what you really need is a smart tag style, one that understands its surroundings and formats an element based on where that element is on the page. So you use descendant selectors to format every instance of a particular tag, but only when those tags appear in a part of a web page. So it's kind of like saying if I had links in this paragraph, any A tags, it's kind of like if I had links in this paragraph. Any A tags in the paragraph, in the main tag, those are the ones that I want to alter. not every A tag in the page, just the ones in a particular area. So again, going back to the family tree analogy, think of the HTML that forms any web page as a kind of family tree. So you start with the HTML tag. Inside of that is the head tag, which takes care of your CSS linking your style sheet to your document, perhaps labeling your page to have a title, and then the body tag. And that body tag contains all of the other content on your page. So that's your headers, your divs, your list items, your paragraphs, your images, your navigation, all that stuff. And by controlling how those selectors interact with one another, you can fine-tune further by using compound or descendant selectors to fine-tune how specific items within other items function together as a whole. So the nice thing about editing this way is when you click in a region, I'll click in my hand quote here. When you click in a region of Dreamweaver, whether it be in the code section or in the design section, when you click the little plus in your CSS designer section, Dreamweaver is going to suggest a descendant selector based upon the position of the cursor in your page. So if I click up here, it's going to specify as deep as it can go into that. So it is skipping the, the body tag in this case, but it is seeing the list item is in the navigation. So using your IDs and using your classes in addition to your tags, it gives you the most specificity possible. And like we mentioned already, this isn't limited to just tags. It can help with tags if we've got tag items nested inside of one another, certainly. But you can build really complex version by combining different types of selectors together. Web designers frequently format the same tag differently depending on where that tag appears in a layout. Good examples right here, where we turned this paragraph into a block quote and then formatted it in a different color, a slightly different style with the red and the indenting, and that it's bold or thicker text. You might even want, for instance, if you have a sidebar and then like a main div or container of some sort for other content, you might want the sidebar paragraphs to appear different from the main div paragraphs. At times, you might want several page elements to share the same formatting. So for instance, you might want all the headers on a page to share a certain color and font, kind of like what we did here where we've got our H1 for our header and then our H2. And you can see right up here, my H1 and H2. I separated them by a comma, but I was able to control each item independently. So this is called a group selector, which lets you apply a style to multiple selectors at the same time. So if I wanted to add this to all of my headings, we'll come down here to the footer. Let's say my footer is here. Let's say I'd like this address to be maybe an H5 for fun. I could come up here and just add an additional comma, H5, and that alters the alignment, the text font, the text color, the weight, how that whole thing comes together. It applies that to each one. And if I click on live, you could see that it also incorporates the shadow that I've added, etc. So by grouping, by using a comma between each one, this lets you apply the same style to any number of elements. I could, as an example, throw in another comma and include my quote in there as well. You could see some of the items adjusted. It took on the center alignment and it took on the shadow, but you will notice that the color is not the same. It kept the brighter red of the initial quote rather than adopting the darker red of the style that the headers have. And this comes down to what's called specificity. Certain styles, as we talked about before, are pickier than others. So we talked about how the tags, the P tags, the H1 tags, these are the least discriminate. But when we start applying classes and IDs, those are a lot pickier. So it's going to look at those two items and pick which one has the most specificity. So it is still keeping the brighter red used, but any items that were not styled in the ham quote, so anything pertaining to size or weight or color, those are already picked out, so it's keeping those, but the alignment, the shadow, items that were not specified in the initial class that we produced are getting added here. So that's why it still maintains a little bit of differentiation, but it does pick up other qualities that applied to this group style that we've produced, this group selector. To undo that, I'll just delete the chunk I don't want, and it goes back to where it was initially. So just a few reminders. If you want to see what specifically you're dealing with a certain region that you're editing, click the show set. If that's unchecked, it's going to give you the whole breakdown, but you do have to search for certain qualities. So if there's an area, or a selector rather, that you want to manipulate, and you'll notice here, see how when I click on each selector, it highlights in blue the regions that are being affected. Also very helpful. Ham quote is only right here. Body tag is the whole thing. Images. It's actually highlighting this one too, but because this image has a lot of white space, because it is a GIF animation, it's showing the highlight in blue here. That can help you kind of stay organized. But by clicking show set here, up in here on the CSS designer, that lets you narrow down how content is going to, what content specifically is being manipulated by that selector, what designs or properties have been added there. When you make changes, Dreamweaver rewrites the rule for that selector in the style sheet for you automatically. So if we click on bacon.css and find our H1, H2, H5 right up here at the top, when I had added the ham quote, you'll see that it automatically adjusted that document as well. And the little asterisk up here and up here, these just refer to things that have been changed. So if you know that something has been altered, you don't just want to save your CSS. You don't just want to alter your HTML document. You want to save the CSS document also to make sure that all of those changes have been corrected all at one time. An easy way to do that is to go to File and Save All, and that will save every document open that has been altered. We'll undo that ham quote again. Something to keep in mind when you are altering your CSS. Keep in mind that if the rule applies to an external style sheet, which it should, any styles here could be affecting other pages as well. So it is important to be conscientious that you may be altering more than one web page as you change styles. So it is good to go back and check your content. And if you're new to CSS, you can learn a lot by watching Dreamweaver edit the style sheet as you work with the CSS designer. Just like how you might be learning HTML by paying attention to what the source code panel looks like as you add content in design or in live. Same thing goes with CSS. And you'll notice it'll highlight and alter as you work. In regards to your style sheet, sometimes you might wind up making a really long, complicated style, and sometimes it's easier to break those up into smaller, separate style sheets. One common design practice for web designers is to store styles that serve related functions in separate style sheets themselves. So as an example, you might want to take all your navigation and put all the styles pertaining to your navigation in a separate style sheet. Fortunately, Dreamweaver makes this relatively easy. You can also rearrange or organize how content appears here by clicking and dragging. You do need to do this in design mode, so click and drag. So now my navigation items I can kind of put all in one region. Navigation 1, I just made a duplicate, so I'm going to delete that one. But I can also shift click and move them as a group that way. If I wanted to separate these on an entirely separate style sheet itself, I'll go ahead and make a new file. I'll call this my bacon navigation, and I'll click OK. To move these, I'll shift click each item I want to apply and then drag them to the new document. So you'll see it disappeared here, but if I click bacon navigation here, everything has relocated. You'll notice that the bacon navigation.css now pops up in my related files as well. So that makes it easy to rearrange content. To copy one or more CSS rule to another style sheet without deleting the original, hold down the Alt or Option key as you drag. So let's pretend I have a link. Maybe my list item was here accidentally, but I need to make some changes. Hold down the Alt or Option key, drag it back to bacon.css, list items here, and list items here as well. And this can be done with internal versus external style sheets as well. If you have an internal style sheet and you want to move content to an external one that maybe isn't even attached to the page, you can do that. But often it's easier to use an internal style sheet when you first start and then take any styles that might be produced elsewhere and then transfer them. I think if you can start external, that tends to be a little easier, but in the end, remember, if you accidentally make an internal style, you can always place it externally later on. We talked about using inspect mode in a previous point in time. Not only does this allow you to sort of narrow down what specific item you might be dealing with, But if you pay attention to this little yellow box that pops up just beneath where my cursor's at, you'll notice it's also telling you what's going on with the CSS. So it's showing you what selectors are affecting that content. So you can see it's an unordered list with the ID for the navigation. So that does give you a little bit of points directly at what it is you're dealing with. So the tooltip is explaining how that content functions and what is affecting it, what selector, if a selector is involved, is being used in that region. You can also use the code navigator to identify styles. So to launch this, I just hold down the Alt or Option key and click on an item. And what that does is it breaks down what that element is. So you can click any item, an image, a heading, paragraph, etc. And it will sort of break down for you what is the item that you clicked on. It's going to tell you what the file is that it's existing on, what CSS document is controlling that content, and it's going to tell you what's in it, what's being affected on each of these. So it'll tell you the p tags have a specific font family and an indent. The body tag is set to have specific properties as well. So that breaks it down a little bit for you as well. Something else that can be kind of fun to explore. Let's say you're wanting to have something a little bit more, a little different. Let's say you'd like to design something maybe just a little bit different. Under Window, there is a section called CSS Transitions, and this opens up sort of its own little window. And we talked about previously the pseudo class, where you can hover over navigation and maybe have it change color or effect as you hover over an object with a pseudo class related to it. But what if you could animate that change so that it maybe runs through a range of changes rather than just blinking from one color to another? Maybe it's a slow fade to text or even to images. So this is where the CSS Transitions panel comes into play. So this can change a background color, it can change the links color, it can have a border grow or fade. So the way that the Transitions panel works is you start by choosing or creating a selector to identify the page element you want to change. So let's see here. I'm going to give my dancing bacon an ID, and I'll call it dancing bacon. All right, so now he's got an ID. I'm going to click the little plus sign, and this lets me target the rule I want to alter. I want to alter my dancing bacon ID. You'll notice it gives me lots of selectors I can pick from, keeping in mind picking the P. All of your paragraphs are going to do something, so you'd want to be real careful about that. But it does pick selectors that are available here, and it doesn't have to be an ID, it can be something else. Now we want to assess, what do we want to do? How do we want this to react if it's, what's causing this transition to happen? So active, disabled, enabled, focus. I'll pick hover just because that is the easiest way to do this interaction. Some of these pertain to like checked or disabled. Checked is like a form item. So I'll pick hover in this instance. And then you can assess, okay, how long do I want this to last? And what sort of delay are we working with? So property, this pertains to what's gonna happen. What are we changing? Background colors, we can have it crop, we can have it move or have a margin alter. Transform, visibility. There are a lot of different effects. I'll go ahead and just pick color. And then I can pick the end value. What color do I want it to become? I'll just pick something that'll stand out. Duration, this is in seconds. So I'll go ahead and we'll pick 5 seconds and a delay of 2 seconds. And ease in, ease out. This just gives us like should give us a nice fade. Where do we create this transition? We can affect it on just this document, make a new style sheet. I'll go ahead and put it on my bacon.css. So we've broken it down, affected what property's changing, what we want it to change to, how long we want it to last, how long it takes to happen, and what is it that's happening. I'll click Create Transition. You'll notice that now it's dancing bacon. When I hover over it, that image is going to alter. So let's take it into live. And in live mode, it's not going to react, so I'll go ahead and do a real-time preview. It'll prompt me to save everybody. Ooh, that green is taking its sweet, sweet time. Once you set up your transitions, you can preview that in a browser to see if it's working. Now, a few things to keep in mind regarding the transitions. They can be a nice fun thing to add. Hover is going to be probably one of the more simple items to manipulate, but it's worth knowing that the panel isn't really as intuitive as it could be. You have to specify 3 components in order for each transition that you got to make. The target selector that you're going to be picking, whatever the triggering event is, and then whatever elements that you want to manipulate there. Now, you can have more than one trigger for a specific target. You'll notice that dancing bacon is still an option here. So this, unlike using IDs, you can apply this to, the same thing multiple times. And it could occur on more than one element on a page. But it's not, as intuitive as it could be. To alter or edit an item, just click the little edit transition and it will open up what you've got and let you manipulate that. To delete it, just hit the delete key and you'll want to specify, do you want to remove just the transition properties, the whole rule, etc., and then you click remove and it will take that away. There are some CSS3 items that you can manipulate as well. Some of these are already present. So we talked about adding a shadow to text initially, sort of like what we've done up here. But you can also add a box shadow as well. So think if you want to add like a subtle shadow beneath your images, you could do that as well. It's down towards the bottom. We'll put in a box shadow real quick. We'll do 5 pixels to the height, 5 pixels to the width. Right now you can see it's a really hard edge, so that looks kind of awkward. So we will want to increase the blur a touch. Spread we'll want to keep relatively low, I'm sure. You can affect the color and inset. Is it on the inside or the outside? So you can see in this instance, it's showing on the interior of my GIF. Unchecking that, make sure that it goes on the outside. Now, this looks kind of nice on this image of the bacon, but a little awkward here. And you would definitely want to be careful about what sort of spread you're getting, because you see how it begins to hide my text. It starts to chop off first few letters of my text content. So you do got to be careful with how you use this. Make sure there's enough of a margin between the images as well as that of the text next to it. Something to keep in mind when you're dealing with CSS3 items like drop shadows is that depending on the browser it's being used in, sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't work as well as it could. So you'll notice right here it's got WebKit next to it. So that means Safari and Chrome browsers will be in good shape, but you might need to do a little research on what you'd need to add for Mozilla Firefox to preview this the way that you intend it. So it is really important to preview all of your content prior to publishing it and calling it a done deal, because it may work fine in certain browsers and not so great in other browsers. And remember, you don't know what your viewers of your website, what their preferred browser is. So you do need to check that. So text shadow and box shadow, these are some nice elements that we've played with a little bit. Border radius, we did that a little bit within the first couple weeks of class, where you can give round corners to an item. I don't think, let's see, border radius is right here under borders, so that's been brought in. You can manipulate gradients. So if you want to add a gradient to the background of an object, there we go, here's gradient. Let's do that. Let's do that on the body tag. Let's add a selector, and I'll make it the body tag. Background, gradient, and you get to pick the range that you work from. So in this case, it's starting at red, or starting at white and ending with red. So let's make it red at the top, white at the bottom, and I hit return. Did it give me a gradient? Yes. It's a little bit harsh, and you can see I can barely see some of my navigation, so that does become problematic. So I'll go in, maybe I'll pick a pale blue instead of that harsh red. Hit return. We've got that nice fade. And you can manipulate how severe that gradient is. So if you want it to be a shorter amount of blue and then more white, there we go. So now it just covers the top tidbit of content and fades to white. So that's nice. But there are a lot of additional content that you can add to your web pages to jazz them up in Dreamweaver. And for the most part, a lot of them are visible in the properties section of the CSS Designer if you know where to look. So whether you're fine-tuning how content can be manipulated or just looking to add a little bit of additional interactivity, be it clever rollovers or placing content in a slightly askew manner, you can do quite a bit just using CSS.